Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm honored to introduce my PhD supervisor, Prof. Chng, for this morning's talk. Let me have a brief introduction of Prof. Chng. Prof. Chng is currently an associate professor in NTU. Prior to joining NTU, he worked in several research centers companies, namely Nautilus Electronics USA, Learnout and Hospi Belgium, Institute of Infocom Research Singapore, and Riken Japan, with a focus in signal processing and speech research. He received both PhD and Bachelor of Engineering from Edinburgh University. His research currently focuses on speech recognition using DNN frameworks, low resources, noisy conditions, and adaptation to target domains, including accent and use cases. Additionally, he explores multilingual code switch speech recognition, such as English to Mandarin and English Malay. To date, he has been a principal investigator of research grants awarded by Alibaba, NTU, Royce, MINDEF, MOE, and A-STAR, with a total funding amount of over 10 million under the Speech and Language Technology Program at SCSE, NTU. He has graduated 17 PhD students and 10 master's engineering students. His publications, including 2 edited books and over 100 journal and conference papers. He has served as the publication chair of 5 international conferences and the local organization committee in ASRU 2019. So without further ado, let's welcome Prof. Chng, please.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, everybody. I'm still trying to recover from my cold, so I'm most happy to be able to see all of you here in Singapore. Present this. Page down. Okay. So in today's talk, I'm going to give a broad overview of our experience of code switch for Mandarin and English across almost a decade in Singapore, in NTU. So I entitled this our NTU Speech Lab Experience for Code Switch. To have a comprehensive background, I understand that although most of us are speech researchers, I'll just spend a short time giving a brief history of our ASR research before diving into Code Switch Singapore English. As most of us know, speech recognition has been with us for over 50 years now, or maybe 70 years if you count from Audrey in IBM in 1952. But I think things started getting hot in 1970s when DARPA introduces the 1,000-word competition. That was in the 1970s. And in the 1980s, when I was a student in the 90s, we had HMM and Dragon being at the forefront of all speech research. And NIST was holding many competitions across the years from the 1990s to the 2000s, asking most public institutions like us in the universities to work on. And it was a very interesting time. In the 2000s, which was actually after the dot-com bust, Microsoft and NSA continued to work on speech research. And in the last 10 years, which was the most exciting part, we had the DNN coming to the forefront to help improve our speech recognition accuracy by a huge bound. Now, this is the most interesting figure that most speech researchers had encountered. On the horizontal axis, you have time, and it went from the 1990s, I think, into the 2000s. And in the y-axis, in log scale, we have the word error rate. And this is produced in conjunction with NIST as well as the DARPA. And basically, DARPA and NIST came up together to organize many competitions. Each of these lines represent a task. And this black line represented the 1,000 red speech tasks. And it showed that when it began, the word error rate was in the mid-30s. And in a couple of years, it went below 4% word error rate. After that, this was abandoned and they tried a new task, the green line. And then they tried another new task, the 20,000 vocabulary. Now, what is significant is that as time progresses, the task becomes more and more difficult. So I'll just highlight this red line for you. This red line is the switchboard corpus, basically conversational speech. And in the 90s, the conversational speech recognition accuracy was near 100%. Interestingly, by 2000, although it kept going down, it flattens very quickly over here, about 30% word error rate, and it didn't go down for a long time. And this was one of the key speech recognition tasks, conversational speech on telephony. Now, for code switch speech recognition, it is also a neighboring task for this. Code switch occurs naturally in conversations, and in Singapore's case, between Mandarin and English very frequently. So let's remember this task, the red line. And in the mid-2000s, it was still hovering there. The other task, which was even more difficult, meeting room speech, are hovering at 40%. And the reason is that there was lots of crosstalk. There was no closed-talk microphone. There's only far-view microphone. So this, even until today, remains a challenge. Now, the last 10 years for us actually have been very, very exciting. For the PhD students, basically it heralded a totally new paradigm as opposed to maybe me when I had to do HMM and GMM from 2010 onwards. I think most students have abandoned HMM and GMM framework and hybrid framework and went into DNN and all the other architecture, deep neural network architecture. Maybe it's all thanks to Hinton. Hinton continued through AI winter from 2000, even in the 1990s, 2000, and then in 2006 he began publishing again. In 2012, the view of four tech giants include Google, Microsoft, I think Amazon as well, showed to the world, or at least the speech recognition world, that DNN was useful for speech recognition. After that, it was basically a non-stop publications of many, many frameworks from LSTM all the way to RNN. And now in the latest one, we have WaveLM and Conformer. So most PhD students today would have to go through all these frameworks to understand speech recognition. And sadly, only the new frameworks and the old hybrid frameworks was never really studied in depth. Now, what's interesting about this is that by 2016, everybody was claiming that they have beat human. So human ability is thought to be about 5% word error rate. So you see that here, Deep Speech have already claimed that they beat a Wall Street Journal to have a recognition accuracy of less than 5%. Now, what about the last? So I explained that I wanted to zoom in on this red line. This is the switchboard line that began in the early 1990s and then stagnated in 2000s. This is the same red line that we have saw just now, and we have now zoomed in onto the different word error rates, and now we extend from 2011 until 2017. These results were extracted from this particular website, and it shows that we have a huge improvement. We have a huge improvement of word error rate. Once we have touched DNN, we began with a CD-DNN, basically using the DNN on the hybrid architecture framework, maybe on CAUDI, and it shows that there was some improvement. But very quickly, once we had RNN and LSTM in transformer, we had already exceeded human performance by 2017 and 18. So it showed that the ASR research had benefited a lot from the DNN. And in fact, code switch is no different. Code switch speech recognition is difficult because this is conversational. But now, I would now take the chance to explain what is code switch Mandarin English as well as the corpus. Now, sometimes one is confused between code switch and multilingual. In multilingual, we will speak in one language followed by another language, but each sentence is complete. In code switch, we'll speak one language, and intra-sentence, we will switch. And you will see that here, I think right before school start, 我们要, then you can switch from English, Chinese, English fluently without any hesitation. And this is what occurs in Singapore. And not only in Mandarin and English, this occurs in Tagalog English, Hindi English, and every other major language pairs. Now, it remains an important research field, and ASRU in 2019 also launched a challenge. Microsoft in 2020 launched a motion. So code switch speech recognition remains an important part of our research in speech recognition. Code switch research, however, requires a lot of data. Basically, if you are in the DNN framework, you would think that without insufficient amount of data, it's impossible to train a code switch speech recognition engine. So some of the pertinent problems that exist is the lack of transcript data. Additionally, Singapore, for Mandarin English, the Singapore accent is accented English. It is not British or American English that have huge corpus. And most of the real recordings for code switch exist really for that are available for training are read speech and not conversational. And if you try to train a multilingual ASR and you try to use that for code switch sentences, it will not work. So these are some of the existing problems that still persist today. Now, we know that to train code switch, you need a corpus. And in fact, if you have a corpus, then maybe half the problem is already solved. So when we began to do this research, we went around to look for existing corpus. And this was done maybe 7 years ago when we came up with this table, or 6 years ago. So the amount of the available corpus for code switch mainly are read speech. These are the corpus available, and these are the number of utterances and number of speakers. But more pertinently, you'll see that the number of hours are very little, except for this OC16, which is 80 hours, and CME, which is the corpus that we developed, which is 192 hours. Most of the corpus are less than 100 hours. The other corpus, in fact, they are not only less than 100 hours, they are also read speech. However, there's one special case by Pascal Fong's group in HKUST in 2012. They did produce a 10-hour conversational code switch corpus, and they again produced one more in 2022 for 10 hours. Let's see. So what I'm trying to now share with you is that to develop a code switch speech recognition engine, a corpus must be there. Now we're trying to show you what are the existing code switch corpus. Now, if you follow this ASRU, you realize that in 2019, ASRU decided to have a challenge of code switch. And we were very excited then because they released a 200 hours corpus. And a 200 hours corpus would become the largest corpus that existed, at least open to all our researchers. But let's listen to some of the sentences produced in this corpus. So the statistic is this. Interestingly, although they had a lot of sentences, this figure shows the statistics, which is that each sentence only have one English word. And this is the typical case that we see in their corpus. So in this ASRU corpus, which was recorded in China, the Chinese inject single word into their conversation, and therefore it is unlike the code switch that we naturally use in Singapore or maybe even in Hong Kong, that we would actually use a few now of verb phrases in between sentences of the alternate language. So you see that 50% or to 70% are single word, and the rest are only two words.
觉得自己 suggestion 还是不错的。
新年第一天来了个 reject， 扎心啊！
Right. So what about? I left saying that Pascal Fung in 2022, after 10 years, developed the next conversational corpus in HKUST. And it is about a 10-hour conversational speech. And it's a high quality, close talk, spontaneous, multilingual conversation. So this is also a very interesting corpus. This is more similar to SIMI as opposed to the ASRU corpus. Now, I will point out to you something very interesting about this corpus, which we also see. The corpus total duration is 10 hours. And typically the person will speak in one language or the other language, as well as mixed language. And you'll realize that 2.88 hours of the 10 hours are mixed. It means that out of the 10 hours, only about 30% is code switch. And this was what we also found. And trying to collect code switch corpus is not a natural thing. I mean, although we code switch naturally, maybe under a natural setting, we only code switch 30% of the time. And hence, trying to collect a huge amount of corpus is a very expensive and difficult task, which we also found. Now, the last corpus that I will introduce is the TALCS corpus. This is a corpus also released by a Chinese TAL education company. And in this TALC corpus, they released 587 hours of data. And this is very nice, but let's listen to this corpus.
He must be home now for the light is on. 他一定在家，因为灯亮着，就是有一种推理或者解释的一种感觉。
So this corpus is recorded only from the teacher teaching students English, and basically we realized that this is not a code switch. This is more like a multilingual problem where the teacher will speak first in English and then in Chinese. But at least it is very large and will be useful for our purpose as well. The word Arabic performance is outstanding, which is less than 10% today for both English and Chinese. So I've just covered the code switch corpus that is available to code switch researchers now. And I explained that NTU team developed the CME corpus. And now I would very briefly go through what is the CME corpus, as well as the research that we have done on it for the last 10 years. So you can download the CME corpus to LDC using this ID number. And we created this and released to LDC in 2015. So let's listen to some of these two conversations, which would actually reflect what we are trying to say about code switch in Singapore.
然后他就讲 but anyway I thought it's 8:30 我就我就奇怪对后来我就去开我的 handphone 的 send message 看我 send 给那个 the fourth group member 是说
Yeah, no idea was she. And now the man in the technical discussion is a little bit slower, but it is very, very difficult as well. Because, yeah, let's see.
Currently 是很多的 spectrum 没有被 fully utilize 哦，他们尽量的在 open up 新的 gigahertz bandwidth for 新的 service, but actually most of the spectrum is not fully utilized 哦。
So I think he switched 4 or 5 times between Chinese and English, and the Singaporeans do speak like this, honestly. Yeah, especially the engineers. Yeah, so and they switch from Chinese to English whenever the technical term is more useful and easier to pronounce and use in English. So he's talking about some gigahertz. Right, so let's talk about the CME corpus. SEA stands for Southeast Asia, ME stands for Mandarin and English. So why Southeast Asia? Because this was collected in Singapore as well as Malaysia. And we collected from our students and volunteers near the universities. That's why the age is only restricted to 19 to 33. And we collected about 192 hours and 156 speakers. Now, you can go through these 4 papers. We began writing about CME in 2010 with Li Chng, where Chng came from Taiwan and joined us on Professor Li Jinghui's recommendation. And Li Chng was key to develop this corpus with Tan Tianping. So we began writing about this in 2010. And 2012 was also an interesting year. Once we have developed half the corpus back then, we worked with Tanya Schutz and Mok Tan Wu in Germany to develop the first speech recognition engine for code switch. So the first code switch speech recognition engine, Mandarin English, came out in 2012. Word error rate was more than 45%, but that was the first one that ever came out. And Dao Chng continued to do analysis in 2015. And finally, in 2017, we finalized the project of the CME corpus with phase 2 delivery and completed analysis, well, at least whatever analysis we wanted to do by 2017. So these 4 papers would be the nice paper to read about the history of the CME corpus. Now, some history now. We started collecting actually even before 2012. We collected at 2009 with USM. So it was almost a 13 years effort ago. By 2010, we have finished about 1/3 of the whole corpus. We only had 30 hours then. And the amount of effort used was exorbitant, really. Exorbitant in the sense that for 1 hour of speech produced, it was 50 to 60 times real time. The efforts mainly was in transcription as well as language boundary labeling, which was huge. So this figure shows what we produce in prep for distribution. Basically, you have the language label, the disfluency label text, the word transcriptions, as well as other languages. Because in Singapore, we include Malay and Hokkien within the spoken words. I'll give you an example. Lasinama is the food, and ang pao is the Hokkien word for red packet. So all these are interjected within our daily speech, and these are all labeled as other languages. Now, by 2015, when we released, it was almost the final release, and what you will receive from LDC now will be this. A total of 162,000 sentences, and for all, and average, we'll have about two language terms. Right. So these statistics are not very important, but basically each sentence is about 3 seconds long with 10 words. So the utterances are relatively short because we are in a conversational speech context. Now this is a bit interesting. How Chng did this analysis? I mean, well, it's not. Basically, we collected all the bigram statistics. And what's really interesting is conjunction between English and Chinese is a trigger word. So if you look at the number of then before the next Chinese word comes, it is very frequent. So this is one of the findings, although we never exploit that, except in language models. The other thing that's interesting is that we think that's interesting. We think adjective, which is maybe difficult in expressing in Chinese, is more easily done in English. That's why people switch from Chinese to English. More interesting. And proper noun like NTU, which is naturally in English, more naturally in English than in Chinese, are also used. So you please keep this in mind. The idea maybe we can put forth is that if we can cleverly generate bilingual sentences, or code switch sentences pseudolly, then we can actually have a chance to not create so many corpus to train, but instead use artificially generated data to train our DNA later. But this is just an idea to take home. So if you guys want to try the CME corpus, please download from LDC and look at this paper. In this paper, we will describe the training, development, and testing set, which many other researchers have used throughout. And by looking at this GitHub, you'll get the proper distribution of training, development, and testing. This is the other interesting performance history on CME. So this on the x-axis again is time from 2013 to 2022. And on the y-axis, we have the word error rate. The blue line represents the CALDI performance, and the red line represents the DNN approaches. So all the references are here, and we collected the statistics across these years. And of course, interestingly, it also mirrors the trend of the NIST competition across all the other corpus. We started with a high 40 word error rate, and today we are at a word error rate less than 20 now for code switch on CME. So about 2019, we stopped the CALDI development. The CALDI development, we stopped primarily because the DNN was actually the more interesting approach. And maybe I'll just focus on this few over here. The Taiwanese team, Li Hongyi's team, have done an excellent job. And I think in one of these paper over here, in the conformal model, they have also released the ESPNet GitHub so that almost all researchers can repeat their performance to sub 20% average fault error rate using ESPNet today. So that's a huge contribution to the society. And today, I will explain how we went one more mile down. We went from 20% to about 17.5% today. So maybe in a couple of slides, I will show you how is it done. But the basic trend that DNN has shown us persists, and the idea that maybe I'll just say that if you use conformal encoder with pre-trained model, you'll get 20% very quickly. And I think that's the take-home message for everybody. Right. Now, who are the active researchers in this field? And we went to take a look, and it includes, of course, the Karlsruhe team by Tang Wu and Tanya Schutz, Hong Yi's team in National Taiwan, the Xinjiang team, the Carnegie Mellon, Damia, Siddhartha, Sihat have also begun to publish recent papers on that, and we saw very good performance from them. And we see Pascal Fong also doing a lot of code switch research. So please, feel free to approach LDC for this corpus. We'll be most happy that to see it more widely used. So maybe in the last 10 minutes, I will share with you some of the things that we've done on the CME corpus. So we start with the blue line. The blue line is the CAUDI line. And in the CAUDI framework, we tried all these. So every tricks in the book, we tried. And the most interesting trick, I think, that worked was to use grapheme-based lexicon. That solved a lot of the problems that we had. We think that using grapheme-based lexicon and sharing grapheme-based the character with the Chinese pronunciation dictionary helped to improve the acoustic model. The CAUDI framework also worked because of TDNN, so the time delay neural networks. So CAUDI, if we had used HMM and GMM, it might not have worked, but the TDNN acoustic model did help a lot. And finally, I told you that they achieved almost sub 20% for CAUDI, and the reason was because of data augmentation. In CAUDI, we tried to increase the amount of data close to 20 times. So there was about 100 hours of training data. We pumped in various codecs and noise, room impulse response, and bring the amount of data to 20 times. And we combined the lattice to improve the speech recognition. And that achieved sub 20% for CAUDI. What about end-to-end? Red line. In end-to-end, we tried also most of the tricks in the book. And we even tried language diarization. We perform language diarization. We recognize language change, and we use the language change boundary to inject language bias on the language model. Although it sounded very nice, it didn't work very much. I mean, it just brings it down by less than 1%. We even tried internal language model and RNN-LM. Again, that improved a little bit, but not much. So in fact, all these tricks did improve, but by not much. And the one we tried very recently that brings down 2.5% to sub 20% is again something very trivial. Again, if we have enough data, and here I'll show it to you. This is what we did to bring it down to sub 18%. we realized that the amount of data that CME has is very limited. There's nothing we can do. So we tried the other way around. We use pre-trained model, large pre-trained model, but not with LM. Instead, we retrain, we take Giga Speech and train the English part. So we have 5,000 BPE on the final layers. So we have a large pre-trained Giga Speech English model. And we cheated. We extend the BPE only from 5,000 to 3,000, additional 3,000 BPE for Chinese. And we only fine-tune the last layer first, and then we again fine-tune the entire encoder. What we then realized is that because of the large pre-trained Giga Speech model and other data, it was good enough to bring the performance way down. So maybe the take-home message now is this: if you ever have a chance now to use large pre-trained model like Wave LM or use pre-trained data like Giga Speech to try, that will be the way to go. So this is a figure of the data that we have used. Giga Speech is 10,000 hours. We also use 2,800 hours of Singapore English, where we have some original data and some augmentation by adding noise reverberation and volume perturbation as well as speed perturbation. And this is what we are going to show you. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 models. And the first model is simply using the CME corpus, just the CME corpus alone and nothing else on a DNN framework. On track 2, we're using the data tank, the Chinese, and the IMDA, the Singapore English. But this training data are only 100 hours. We just wanted to see if we use a small 100 hours, what would they show? And in fine-tune 3, this is the interesting bit. We then use this second model to be the base model and fine-tune. And then we repeat using larger and larger pre-trained models. And here, in number 4, we are using the 10,000 Giga Speech model. And here, we are using the 10,000 plus the 2,800 hours of Singapore English as pre-trained model. Now, let's see the performance. So we have 5 models here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the last guy is Whisper. So Whisper was released by AI, OpenAI, and it didn't do anything for us. The blue is the Mandarin word error rate. The red is the English. And the other 2 lines are Chinese as well as English sentences, but not from CME. So let's observe the blue and the red. So when we say that it is the addition of these 2, so this is about 26 and this is about 18. So 26 plus 18, we have 44. 44 divided by 2, we have the average. So we started from this performance. When we use other corpus to train Mandarin and English, it was useless. Nothing happened with this CME English Mandarin. However, when we use the training 2 model as the base model and fine-tune immediately, there's a drop. There's again a drop when we use the Giga Speech pre-trained model and then fine-tune. And then there's a drop again when we use a Giga Speech and the Singapore English 2,800 hours. So we got this idea basically. Google Speech still showed that if you just keep on dumping enough data, then maybe it's going to work. Of course, we can't dump any sort of data. Maybe here we are a little bit more biased. We selected the Singapore English data from IMDA as the base model to help retrain. So today, the word error rate now is standing at 15 and 19. So we are sitting at maybe close to 36%. 36% divided by 2 is 18%. So the average of it is sub 18 now. So this is the state of the art for code switch for CV corpus today. Now, I will not do the demo. I'm going to, maybe I'll do this during the break with you guys, but I'm not sure it's going to. You can actually try this demo and try live, and then if you can speak English and Chinese, you can see it coming up. Okay, but maybe after today's talk. So with that, maybe I'll leave you with what's possible for code switch. So we reviewed and realized that you can break the research into 3 big categories for code switch. You can act on the pronunciation part, you can act on the modeling part, and one part you can act on is the text part. Basically means that if you can generate artificial code switch speech, this will be the place to go. Now, if you can generate artificial code switch speech, then in the past you can modify Caudy's language model easily. But what of end-to-end system? So let's say you can already generate enough code switch sentences. And there are many ways, so I'm not going to tell you how. But I think this is one way we can go. So Speech T5 introduces a very interesting way to train end-to-end with dual or multiple functionality. You take speech, you can generate speech, you can generate text. You take text, you can generate speech, you can generate text. You can inject speech and text at the decoder level. So at 2 different places, you can insert speech or text into the system and get speech or text output. Now, if we are clever, if somehow we can manage this carefully, we can inject code switch text here or code switch text here somehow. And therefore, we do not even need code switch speech to train anymore. We just send English here, send Chinese here, so that the encoder and decoder can recognize English and Chinese for the acoustic part. And when we inject the code switch text here, then we can train the whole system. Now, I think to properly solve this, maybe we have to use this idea that the semantic embedding of the English and the Chinese must be at the same place. Or without that constraint, then the decoder is not going to work. So the sentence like, I want to buy 苹果 and I want to buy apple. If the word embedding of apple and 苹果 is at the same place, then the decoder is going to work regardless of whether you are going to say, I'm going to buy apple or I'm going to buy 苹果. So that's the final take-home message that I think is one of the interesting direction that maybe future researchers of code switch can go to. So we say that code switch can be naturally solved if the multilingual embedding public representation in the decoder framework are the same. So with that, I'd like to thank the past researchers who have helped over the last 10 years to work on this. Recently was Icho and Yang Yuhang, Na, as well as Hassan, Xi Haihua, Zheng Ziping, and Mao Tingzi. Yeah, thank you very much.
We have questions for Prof. Chng.
Okay, I have two questions. The first question is about it was interesting to see the scene compass where you have like top 30 code switch word between English, Chinese and Chinese language, right? So, but and interesting to see can push down the word rate to 20. Question is that I think for code switch, even in Singapore, right, younger generations they are going to code switch differently from my kids. So how would that the performance that we see on the CV corpus will generalize to those different traits or any domain applications that we can explore. Then the second question is about T5 to generate synthetic data. So the input will be the code switch text, right? So how you about how to generate those systems? Thanks.
Okay. So Kong is right. The younger generation will code switch differently from us. Same like we code switch differently from the Chinese or even the Hong Konger. So that's why when we collected this code switch corpus, it was for Malaysia and Singapore. And we also note that there is difference in performance. The Singaporean speaks more English or the Malaysian speaks more Chinese as their master language. So we think that unless you collect more data, you might not get very far. So that's why we think that if you can generate artificial data, then the augmentation as well as the fine-tuning for neural generation become less of a pain. We do not need to collect more data. To generate artificial data, there are many ways. This is only one of the ways. In here, we think that basically they generated pseudo-parallel data, and then by choosing certain noun and verb phrase of which is suitable, they will generate multiple other sentences. This is one way, but it might not capture the code switching behavior. That is why I believe that I believe that at least for the Singaporean, the Singaporean Chinese use the Chinese grammar to speak an English sentence, or the Singaporean English-speaking population use the English grammar to speak part of the Chinese sentence. Like, I'm going to buy 苹果，然后我要去. So if you actually change part of the phrase, you'll realize that it's the part is a direct translation from English to Chinese, from Chinese to English. Hence, if that is true, then by bilingual embedding, we do not need to even care if the style of code switch changes anymore. So 我要买苹果 and I want to buy apple becomes natural because we only train the system with full English sentences or full Chinese sentences. You capture this behavior naturally. That's what I think hasn't been proven.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I was just wondering, I know you're at the start, you're talking about the speech recognition rates coming down. On switchboard, they estimate it's about 5-6% of what humans can transcribe accuracy. So I was wondering, do you have an estimate for code switch, your code switch corpus? Where can you get to? What's the best?
I wouldn't try, but maybe about 5% would be good. But when we listened to that girl just now, it was very difficult. So yeah, we don't know. And there's an added difficulty because many of these speakers have huge very big accent, so it's quite difficult. Prof. Lee.
Thank you. I believe your performance is constrained because you have very little data to play with. So, but judging from what we have seen in yesterday's keynote, actually, I believe that these systems can do some of the job for you on code switch speech already. But the main difficulty would be what you just said, accents, because in Dr. Lee's system, I think they are very good in native speakers, but when you have accented Mandarin and also accented English mixed together, this will be a hard problem. So it will be interesting to try Dr. Lee's system on your test data and see what they can get with their performance.
Okay. Now we'll ask Chng. Yes, thank you.
No more questions. Then well, thank you, Prof. Chng. To show our appreciation, have something to send.